Did you read that comment?
Which one?
On the shoestring, on that documentary.
Which one?
The guy said, "Oh, cool son is crap teeth."
I first met Jules when I was walking around the streets because I was trying to use a camera that I had just bought. It was the A7S II. And I met him on the street, he was busking, and I was just filming him. And after he finished, he called me over and we had a chat. And then the documentary that I did with him in 2016 was called Living on a Shoestring, and it was just about him. It was more a profile piece than a mini documentary, but that's essentially how we met.
Now we're cooking on gas. We're getting there now. That's it. The picture's building.
The documentary Together Again came about because I got in touch with Jules during the pandemic. I wanted to find out how he was getting on, what he was doing, and because most of his income comes from busking on the street, I wanted to find out how it was affecting him because obviously the country was in lockdown, the whole world was in lockdown, so you couldn't go outside, and so I just wanted to catch up with him, see how he was doing. And then we started talking. We thought, we talked about making another documentary based on the stuff that he was doing, and so that's how Together Again came about.
I think what it is I can't really hear the guitar enough to hear the chords, right? So we might have that might be a bit too long.
Filming Together Again definitely took longer than I was anticipating, but that was only because of the pandemic, and we started filming the first part, which was in the studio. So Jules had booked some studio time to go in and record the song, so I went and I basically filmed that whole process. For that I used the A7S II because I still had it at the time, and I used my Ninja Assassin, my monitor, and also used my NTG4 Plus to just capture the B-roll sounds. And also I used my monopod, so I love using my monopod when I'm just getting B-roll sometimes because it allows me to use the pan and the tilt fluid head, but also it kind of gives you a handheld vibe but without it being really shaky. So I love using the monopod, so I used that, and then I also used the tripod at some points, but I think most of the time it was on the monopod, or there were times when I was actually using the camera handheld.
1, 2, like that. That's it.
Filming in the studio was just before Christmas 2020, and literally after that the country went into another lockdown, so I couldn't then film the interviews, which is what I was hoping to do next. And normally what I do tend to do is film interviews first so that I can get a sense of what's been said and where the story's gone and how the story's going to come together, and then I film the B-roll afterwards. But in this case it just didn't work out that way just because of the timings and when the studio was booked, and it worked out fine. It was absolutely fine because I knew that I was going to need studio footage anyway. So we couldn't film the interviews until summertime 2021, when restrictions had kind of been lifted and everything was kind of back to normal, not fully back to normal, but people could interact with each other again. And so I went and I filmed Jules's interview, and we were actually going to film it in the studio, but something happened on the day, we couldn't get into the studio, so we went to a pub that Jules likes to go to, and we sat in the garden and we filmed the interview there, which was really nice. But the only problem with it was the fact that there were birds chirping, and that really annoyed me in the film because I hear these birds chirping, and so that it didn't give me the cleanest audio, which was a little bit disappointing.
So that's what inspired it. And so then what happened was, I had a few little things that happened.
But for the gear for the interview with Jules, by that time I'd gotten rid of my A7S II, and so I used my A7 III, and I had two of those, so I actually had a dual setup going on. So I had my A7 III with my Zeiss Batis 40mm, and then my second A7 III with my Zeiss Batis 85mm. So one of the reasons why I wanted to have the dual camera setup, the multi-camera setup, was because during an interview you want to be kind of chopping up the dialogue, and so when you do that you don't want it to look really jumpy. And with living on a shoestring, I only had one camera, so when I wanted to chop up the interview, the dialogue, I had to kind of punch in and punch out and punch in and punch out, and I don't really like doing that. So it was really nice to actually have two cameras, and have two cameras that were exactly the same, so there wasn't much to colour correct and colour grade between the two of them. And so the camera settings were set exactly the same. And for the audio, I actually used the Hollyland Lark 150 for the interview because it's got two transmitters. Yeah, two transmitters. It meant that I could have one of the lav mics on and Jules could have the other lav mic on. So if I did want to include anything that I said, or like for the BTS video, anything like that, then it meant that I could do that and have clear audio. And then I also pretty much had the same setup when I was filming Prof Bar's interview as well, and that was also outside. The challenge with that was that there was a plane that was flying around and we just had to keep stopping and then starting again, but it was all right because he interviews really well and he just picked up from where he left off, and there was no awkwardness or anything, so that was really good. And it was great having a chat with him and actually finding out more about the Surgical Laser Trust Fund, which is what the documentary is fundraising for.
Let's hope he doesn't start doing circuits.
In terms of editing the documentary, so because I had shot the studio footage, I was basically sitting on it for a good 6-7 months. And as soon as I shot the interviews, then the editing started to happen. And so the first interview that I cut was Jules's, because I knew that was going to be the main part of the video. And so I just went through, and with Jules, I didn't try and steer the conversation in any way. I just let him talk, and he's very good at talking, but he's also very good at articulating what he wants to say as well. So I just let him talk and tell me his perspective of things, and the story kind of came together just based on his timeline of events and the way that he was telling me his whole situation throughout lockdown. So I didn't feel like I had to steer it in any way, and I think that the narrative that we got was pretty much what I would have wanted anyway. And then, so his interview, I cut that first, and then after his interview was pretty much cut, I did Prof Bar's interview, and I was keen to put more of Prof Bar in the documentary, but I also didn't want to make it too long. I was also conscious that it was already quite long, so that's why I did a separate interview video for Prof Bar's full interview, because he gave so much good information that I didn't want to just kind of bin the rest of the interview. So I just decided to create an entire video of that on its own. So yeah, that's something that you can check out, because it talks more about the Laser Trust Fund and what they do and how they do it and that kind of thing. So once I had cut both of those interviews together and I basically had the narrative for the documentary, then I started putting the B-roll on top of it. And this part, I kind of did the first draft and then I went over it again, and I was really keen to put bits that wasn't just B-roll on top of the narrative, but parts where I had filmed Jules whilst he was in the studio and he was talking to me in the studio, so having little excerpts like that. And I quite like that, and I think it kind of breaks up the documentary. And the other thing was filming Jules in his van as well, so that also happened in the summertime. And with some of the B-roll, I did already have the sound effects, but with some of the other stuff, it wasn't clean. The sound effects weren't quite clean enough, so I used audio and Epidemic Sound to just get the sound effects that I wanted. So for example, at the beginning, him walking towards his car, getting in the car, closing the door, they were all sound effects that I added afterwards. And for the music, apart from the last song, which is obviously Jules's track, the music was from audio, and I love that site. It's just so good. It just has such a range of tracks and you can just easily find what you need. So music that I used for the documentary, which wasn't the Together Again main track, was all from audio. And also the music that I used in Prof Bar's full interview video was also from audio. And then once I had basically got the music and the sound effects in place and everything was kind of looking how I wanted it to, then I went to the colour correcting and colour grading. And for that I used Film Convert Nitrate. You will hear me raving about Film Convert Nitrate so much because I absolutely love it. I really do just love it. It's just such a great plugin. And it just really allows me to get the look that I want for the videos that I create. So yep, colour corrected, colour graded with Film Convert, and then that was the final piece.
So nervous, Tamara. I don't know why. Just get really nervous. My legs are shaking.
So I think one of the challenges with the documentary was that I didn't get as much B-roll as I wanted to, just because of restrictions and not being able to film at certain times. And one of the things that I really wanted to do was actually get some footage of Prof Bar in the hospital or working or doing that kind of stuff, but I wouldn't have been allowed in the hospital because of the restrictions and everything. So that was really disappointing, because I kind of wanted to have that over the top of what Prof Bar was talking about, so that you could actually see him working and see his colleagues working and that kind of thing. And I also, because I felt like I was on quite a time limit, and I can't really multitask. I couldn't get as much behind the scenes footage as I would have liked, because I do like to put BTS videos together, because I actually find it useful for myself when I look back like a year from now or a couple of years from now, just to see how I shot something, but also just for you guys as well. So I didn't get quite as much BTS footage as I would have liked. And when I was filming in the studio, I did have my I had my second camera set up in the corner, and I just kept moving it around just so that I could get something and show you guys in the beginning me setting up my gear and what gear I was using and whatnot. And that also reminds me that I also used the DJI RS2 when I was outside. So the shots where Jules and his friend are doing the dry stone walling, that was shot using my RS2 with my A7 III on the gimbal. And then for the drone shots, I used the DJI Mini 2. But yeah, they're the main challenges. And like I said, also not having access to the studio that day to do the interview, so hearing the birds chirping in the background and whatnot.
Anyway, that's the licence for Princess Hay in Exeter. When I want to go and play there for a couple of hours, you just pitch up. And that's an audition licence. Took about 2 months to get, and it just rolls on and rolls on.
I'm definitely happy with how it turned out. I think that I've come a long way from how I filmed and cut living on a shoestring. So, it's all still a learning curve. I'm still learning as I do things and learning different ways of doing things and trying to find my style and all that. But one of the things that I really want to focus on in 2022 is shooting short narratives. So I think I'm gonna park the documentaries for now and then focus on doing some short narratives, because I want to do something where it's going to be really creative and I can get my mind going in that creative way, and just come up with something completely fictional and do that. And it's just a completely different process as well, I think, when you're shooting a documentary to shooting a short narrative. So yeah, that is Together Again, and check it out if you haven't already. The links are in the description, and yeah, see you on the next video.
I mean, Wayne Lead, my Caribbean producer from London, when it came to my voice, he said, "You're like Marmite. We like you or we hate you." So I went, oh, so he used to try to get me to sing as little as possible. Not that I minded. I think we're done.